What's going on? Welcome to the latest episode of the Genesys Cloud Community's Q&A show, the show where we answer your pressing questions in the Genesys Cloud online community. My name is Matt Lawson. I'm your online community manager, and today we're doing a follow-up on our discussions that we've had about WebRTC. In the past, we had our friend Alan come on. He's done 2 episodes, I think, before where we've gotten into WebRTC. And believe it or not, we still get a lot of questions on the topic. So today we put it to you in the community. What were the questions that you still had for Alan and his team? And you all did not fail to answer. In fact, I think over 20 questions came in, and great news. If you got them in on the thread where I asked for your questions, they are all going to get answered in this episode. It's a good episode, a lot of great information out there. That being said, let's kick things off and welcome Alan and David to the show so that we can start getting some answers to your questions. Alan, David, welcome to the Q&A show. How are you guys?
Doing great. How are you?
So when we were brainstorming ideas, we thought it would be a really good idea to go over some of the frequently asked questions around WebRTC, bring your own devices, all of that. I posted a thread in the Genesys Cloud community. You can see it now. It is beautiful. And we had some really great questions come in. Our friend of the show, Robert, came in with 14 questions of his own. A few other people chimed in with 4, 1, 3, a couple of other questions. You all were kind enough to take all of these questions, break them out into a document, put them in some kind of order that's going to be easy for our audience to follow. And I think what we're going to be able to do is just go one by one and answer them all. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
The first question that we're going to start with is, how important is it to install the headset management tool from the manufacturer? The manufacturer could be Polylens, Jabra, Express, etc.
So we're continuing to add support for more and more headset manufacturers. You mentioned a few of them, but yes, to achieve call control on that device, some other manufacturers do require their software to be running on the desktop. Poly, HP, Sennheiser, EPOS, those are 2 manufacturers that require a desktop app to be running in order to communicate with the Genesys software. Fortunately, there's a new latest and greatest feature coming down the pipeline from Google and other browser manufacturers called WebHID. And it's a web human interface device control. So it allows web browsers applications to run in the web browsers and access these WebHID devices like our headsets. So Jabra has already taken advantage of this. You no longer need the Jabra third-party device management software installed to use this in our web-based applications. Poly HP is working on it as well. And we have a couple new headset manufacturers, VBET, that are developing integration through our WebHID and WebRTC SDK. So looking forward to WebHID and how that'll make things easier down the road.
And the question I get emailed the most is along this. It's along, the idea of like somebody bought a headset that isn't quite working. Can you talk a little bit about the process of who evaluates the headsets to make sure they're compatible with Genesys? Where can they go to learn more about whether or not like the headset will work? Any kind of general advice you can give in terms of like best practices for buying a headset?
Yeah, no, first line is to verify that in the Genesys Documentation Resource Center that it is a manufacturer that's compatible with Genesys software. The manufacturers are responsible for testing and validating their integration into Genesys. We do our own testing and validation on some of the most popular and well used devices and models.
But we can't cover them all.
We can't cover them all.
That's true. There are just a lot of them. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah. Each manufacturer has their own standards and set integration methods. With WebHID, that's helping kind of centralize all that into a single API that reduces the amount of effort it takes for us to test and validate. But best bet is to go with your manufacturer, and then from there we can work with the manufacturer to verify that it's integrated properly with Genesys.
Cool, perfect. Yeah, thanks for that. Another question that came in from our community audience: when will unmanaged phones work in cloud sites?
Yeah, I get that question a lot as well. So we have our matrix of compatible phones that can be managed with Genesys. Various different manufacturers, but we can't cover them all. Unmanaged phones are a SIP device that can communicate as a phone in Genesys Cloud. And it is supported today through BYOC premises, but that does require a premises edge on site to utilize a generic SIP device. Fortunately, we're wrapping up development on generic SIP for cloud, so that generic SIP devices can be utilized in cloud sites. If there's a phone, a fax, an analog device, a pager, something that's not currently fully managed by Genesys today, it could be added into the Genesys as a phone through generic SIP. So we're hoping to have that out here in the next quarter.
Cool. Awesome. Another question that came in: are local edges a thing of the past, and will they be supported in the future?
Local edges are a thing of the past. As far as edges purchased from Genesys no longer sells premises edges, but we've expanded that into the customer hardware solution. So we've leveraged the HP hardware ecosystem and allowing customers to choose from a select list of hardware, and they can leverage that as an edge going forward. So that reduces the burden of shipping from the United States throughout the world. Customers can now acquire their hardware locally, and Genesys will support that software through the end of life. And we have our end of life announcements and breaking change announcements that will provide a great lead time for anyone currently using that to provide a good path forward over into cloud.
Okay, cool. Looking ahead and knowing questions that'll be coming up, I know we have another one kind of similar to this that we'll be talking about later. But how can a user avoid dropping calls when a browser is accidentally closed during a WebRTC call?
Yeah, so I've had that come up as well as refreshing a browser could be problematic. What we've implemented is a notification in Chrome or Chromium-based browsers to prompt the user before closing the browser or refreshing it. So you'll see that little friendly pop-up that says, "Are you sure you want to refresh or close?" And that should prevent that call from being ended at that point. You could also run one of our desktop apps in the background so that you're not closing the browser and ending a call that way.
Actually, so the next question that we have, and it's really funny, when you all made this document, you were kind enough to put them in different kinds of blocks for me, and we're still in what we call the general block right now. And I love this question because I always love definitions. I was a literary major. So let's get into this. What is GMF?
What is GMF? I could take that one. GMF is Global Media Fabric. And what that means is, to start, Genesys Cloud operates in over a dozen regions around the world. Chances are there's a region near you, and if there isn't, there will be soon. But historically, when you create an org, you would base it out of a region, and you are limited to using the services in that region alone. Global Media Fabric unlocks all of the media services around the world in all of our regions and makes them fair game for customers to opt into using them for their users or their BYOC cloud trunks. And for example, if you have an org based out of US West 2, let's say, but you have operations in Europe, you can opt into using the Media Fabric region in Frankfurt. You can direct your BYOC cloud carrier to deliver audio straight into Frankfurt, as well as any agents you may have over there. Their phones will be anchored through Frankfurt as well. So you have the minimal length of RTP path from a carrier in Europe, European media service, to an agent in Europe, despite the fact that your org is based out of US West 2. And if you ever had reason for a call to traverse between the regions, like a user in Europe, carrier in US West, the Media Fabric would be responsible for getting that audio across the ocean within the Genesys Cloud services in the AWS infrastructure.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. We appreciate that. Here was a question that came in. How do you prove your WebRTC phone is connected to a local GMF region. For example, I am a user in the US West, but am in India. How can I prove my audio is in India?
For today, the site that a user's phone is pinned to, it has a media region configuration. And if you have put India in that config, exclusively India, the solution will honor that configuration and only negotiate media between the user's phone and our services in India. If you put multiple regions, we try them from top to bottom. If there's a fault or India is overcapacity or something, we'll fail over to the next one. But if it absolutely has to be routed through India, just put India in your list and you can be sure that that is the only region we're using. We have internal logging that shows us, we can prove it out. But I want to expose that to customers because ideally you could go in historically, look at an interaction and confirm right there in the product yourself what region was used. We have tools we're working on to expose those. And later on in this session, we have another question on WebRTC troubleshooting, and I'll cover it in more detail when we get to it.
Related, I think this is the last one related to GMF. Will Genesys ever create GMF that is not dependent on the AWS.com or Google.com address changes?
Yeah, I took this question to mean that that the person asking it is not thrilled with having to allow connections to star.aws.com and star.google.com domain spaces. Those names really don't have anything to do with GMF. It's Genesys Cloud as a whole currently requires the ability to resolve and connect to star.aws.com for a variety of reasons. The star.google.com, that's historically was required for WebRTC for stun because Google provides a globally available stun lookup that is quite efficient. But that is now optional. If you don't allow resolution and connections to the star.google.com DNS names, we will use our own stun. In fact, we try them. We always try Google and we always try our own stun, and the first to respond is what is used. So for now, star.aws.com, that is still required for Genesys Cloud to function, but star.google.com is optional.
That concludes our section on just general advice, general questions. We're moving right on into best practices. This question's kind of fun. What are the do's and don'ts when architecting and deploying WebRTC?
So first off, we recommend running the WebRTC diagnostic app. You've probably heard of that before, but it was updated last year to include some additional configuration settings and tests to include our GMF and CIDR ranges. So I would start there. That'll expose any firewall issues or port configurations. Outside of that, it's best to keep any real-time audio outside of your VPN, your VDI, or proxies. Anytime there's an additional hop in your network, that's going to introduce latency and could drop packets, and that's when you start to notice blips in your audio. Calls in a VPN when a VPN drop cannot be recovered, so that's another issue with having a VPN audio piped through the VPN. And like we mentioned, the audio latency can really increase in some of those VPN scenarios.
David, thanks so much for that. And everybody, if you're a little curious about the WebRTC diagnostic app, we are going to cover it more when we get into troubleshooting. For right now, though, Alan, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I've got a few more best practices. At this point, everybody out there has probably heard about the Genesys-owned CIDR ranges. These are IP address blocks that Genesys purchased. We own them, and we are now allocating those to our public-facing media services, as well as a handful of other services. So be sure to follow the guidance on the Resource Center to allow connections to the entirety of the Genesys-owned IP address ranges, as well as keeping an eye on the RTP port range requirements. Every now and then, the customer will experience an issue because they decide to look at the traffic and see what addresses the client is currently requesting connections with, and they whitelist based on that rather than allowing connections to the entire range. And then they have call failures in the future because, of course, the services come up on the other IPs in the future. So allow access to the entire range to be as future-proof as possible. Next, only use the force turn feature if it is 100% necessary. Force turn and geoturn were very useful features before Genesys migrated the media services to be on the Genesys-owned IP ranges and before Global Media Fabric was released. But Global Media Fabric provides superior and more resilient functionality for nearly all use cases. If you're still using force turn as a way to reduce the number of allowed IP address targets, please consider moving away from it, since, like we just said, the services are all running on pre-known Genesys addresses now. And if you're using it for geographical purposes, look into opting into a Global Media Fabric configuration, because it can provide that same geographic improvement and lower latency improvement better than force and geoturn. Next, if you're running a custom WebRTC client that you've built on our SDK, ensure you're keeping up to date on the Genesys Cloud WebRTC SDK, just so you get the latest functionality, performance improvements, and all of the fixes.
Where can they
the last thing?
Oh, sorry, Alan. Where can they find the Genesys Cloud WebRTC SDK if they haven't found it already? Like in terms of keeping up to date on the functionality and everything.
Yeah, they could search the Resource Center. We have information on the SDK there. It's hosted on
GitHub.
The GitHub. Thanks, David. It's hosted on GitHub. It's publicly available. Of course, it has its own self-documentation in the SDK itself. Okay, and last, if you're a dialer customer and you need to minimize the delay from the time a customer picks up the call to having an agent ready for two-way speech, of course, consider using auto answer and persistent connection so that the control plane traffic, call setup, all of that stuff's already out of the way. You get them on with the agent as quickly as possible.
Next, the idea was to move on to VDI and VPN. A question that we had was, how is Genesys working with Citrix, VMware, and Windows 365 to optimize audio through VDI solutions where a thin client, as in no local OS, or operating system is used?
So the best scenario is always to get the audio outside of the VDI infrastructure, make it point-to-point from the client to Genesys Cloud Media Services. And there's a few ways to do that. There's the well-known hardware phones. You put a physical phone on your desk and route the audio directly to your phone. It doesn't go through your VDI in that place. The other option is that we provide is WebRTC Media Helper, or another technology like browser content redirection provided by Citrix. So WebRTC Media Helper, it's a browser-based Genesys application that runs on the client machine outside of the VDI instance, and its sole purpose is to route media directly to that VDI client machine, or thin client. And now there's situations where not all thin clients allow you to run a third-party application. They want everything running within the VDI. And in that scenario, we have a technology that we've learned to utilize in Citrix called browser content redirection, BCR. Essentially allows you to configure the instance to run specific parts of the application outside of the VDI on the local machine, but without the need to install third-party applications. So those are a few of the options that we've come up with today, but there's a lot more that can be done, and Alan's going to touch on a little more here.
Yeah, thanks, David. A little more on the WebRTC Media Helper and VDI scenarios. By default, the Media Helper is not required, so agents can choose to run it. They can launch it, authenticate, connect, and it will route media outside of the VDI solution. But if they choose not to run it, or they forget to, the media will be routed to the standard WebRTC client that is within the VDI environment. In many cases, this is unacceptable, and it tends to crush the infrastructure, or at the very least, degrade performance for any other VDI users on the same host. So that may not be ideal. The good news is we have a feature in beta right now that allows administrators to require the use of Media Helper for a given user or users. If you enable this setting for an agent and they do not connect their Media Helper, any calls that are sent their way or they attempt to place themselves will be greeted with an error. The error is very descriptive. It tells them exactly what the problem is. And supervisors can filter their views to see how often a given agent experiences that error. So you can train them on how to resolve and get them back in operation. Lastly, when using browser content redirection, whether it's Citrix or an alternative implementation, we recommend using the WebRTC Media Helper and configuring BCR against the Media Helper URI. This provides the benefit of BCR rendering the WebRTC media outside of the VDI solution, which is the goal, but it keeps the context of the standard client consistent with the rest of the applications in the VDI workspace. If BCR is configured against the standard client, the entire client will be rendered outside of the VDI and be in a different context. So you'll lose things like the ability to copy and paste between the applications, click to dial, things like that just won't function properly. We have a document on the Resource Center that describes how to do this, specifically with Citrix BCR, but any vendor that also implements BCR, the concepts apply.
Well, I was going to go back real quick to the WebRTC Media Helper beta that you have. Off the top of my head, I can't remember if you're still accepting applicants for that. Do you know?
Yeah, we can enable the require Media Helper. Media Helper itself has been GA for a very long time. It's solid. We have customers using it all around the world. The new functionality is the administrative ability to require the use of it. That's in beta. If you're interested in that, reach out through your account owner, and we can make it happen.
Cool. Yeah. And of course, if you're interested in other betas, the community now has a beta headquarters community where you can find out betas that are available and enrolling. So check that page out to learn more. We had one more question that came in on this topic. What are the best practices when using WebRTC phone in a split tunnel scenario?
Our recommendation is to have all Genesys Cloud traffic outside of the VPN. That's our recommendation. Of course, we realize there are customers who are unable to do this. So the best we can recommend in that case is to opt all of the Genesys Cloud media traffic outside of the VPN at the very least. And this can be accomplished because the media services are all running on the Genesys owned CIDR blocks. But really, it would be ideal if all Genesys Cloud traffic could be routed outside of the VPN. That way you don't have to worry about what happens when the VPN cycles or the extra latency introduced by the VPN or any of the other typical split tunnel issues.
On to our old frenemy, whatever you want to call it, troubleshooting and monitoring. This first question is always one of my favorites because I don't think it's something we have a great answer for, but I want to ask it so that people understand what to do in this situation. What troubleshooting steps can be taken when the WebRTC persistent connection pop-up for SFDC closes unexpectedly?
One, it's not a common scenario that we hear of. Sounds like it's likely a local network issue or a machine issue. It's hard to identify without a deep dive with Genesys Care, where they can gather some additional logs and input to better evaluate what's going on there. But yeah, I would recommend opening a case with Care, and then we can get as much information gathered that way as possible.
How do we troubleshoot WebRTC issues? What tools are available to us?
So back to our WebRTC diagnostic tool. This is built into the app, or we have a standalone version of it as described in the Resource Center. You'll select the URL for your specific region, and you'll run that test app in the Resource Center. What it tells you is if you have a healthy connection to our streaming client, it tells us about your WebRTC station health, whether you're able to reach the Genesys Cloud CIDR ranges that we were discussing earlier, and it actually places a real test call to your voicemail and tells you whether that's successful or not. And it also pins a MOS score based on your interaction latency, so you can actually put a number and score each call, alongside agents being able to flag a call to say that, you know, this WebRTC session had issues, and then you can come back later and see if there's any kind of trends or bridges between those two.
Let's go ahead to the next question. What steps are being taken to provide better monitoring of WebRTC connections, specifically forcing a reconnect or providing feedback to the agent that communication between GC and the WebRTC is no longer available?
I previously hinted at providing additional information on a product, in the product, that tells you what media regions were used for a given call leg. That project is in progress, but it's part of a larger project to expand the media performance information that we provide. In addition to providing the media regions, the new performance statistics will show things like call setup duration, packets sent, packets received, RFC 2833 events, and then MOS. But we've always had MOS, a cumulative score for the whole call, but this will be showing all of this information per call leg. So it will be trivial to identify which leg of a call had an adverse impact on a call's audio quality. Once this feature is released, we're going to continue to add more statistics to provide the maximum benefit for understanding call quality, connection health, and providing as much troubleshooting information as possible. Like I said, it's in progress. We're waiting on a final code change and then the QA effort, so we're expecting to release in a few months. This question specifically asked about situations where communication between the client and the cloud services is interrupted. And we've all experienced this, especially when most of us were sent to work at home during the COVID lockdowns. But ISP drops, VPN drops, changing Wi-Fi to wired, whatever the situation is, they all introduce interruptions to the connection, and we want to handle those better. The good news is that we're close to releasing a feature that you could summarize it as graceful media recovery for WebRTC. It introduces configurable thresholds to trigger media renegotiation when our media layer detects that the audio stream has died. So whatever your timeout is, the sensitivity you set, we will detect that the stream has died, initiate renegotiation of the media stream. If it's successful, the call logs that a recovery request had to happen and proceeded, but then proceeds as normal. If it's unsuccessful, it'll retry until you get to the max timeout, and then it will log the fatal error on the conversation as being a media drop that was unsuccessfully recovered. This is also well along in development. Unfortunately, it does require the media performance effort to get out as a prerequisite, so it will follow it when it comes to release. The last thing I want to say about this question is it's not clear in the question whether or not this was specifically regarding persistent connection or just general WebRTC, but we are launching an improvement to persistent connection such that the connection will automatically be established when an agent attempts to go on queue, and it will block them from finishing going on queue until that connection is there and healthy. So we have some improvements coming there as well.
This next section is what we're going to close on, and it's just kind of a mixed bag that you all labeled as additional questions. The first one is there a way to turn off direct media between two WebRTC clients when firewalls would not allow that?
We have a previous Q&A session up on the community center that goes into detail on how WebRTC audio paths are established. If you're interested in the details of that, please check out that video. The entire video is dedicated to that. I'll go through a shortened version to help answer this question. When we try to set up a WebRTC call, there are different types of audio paths to try, and the optimal path is chosen based on responsiveness, actually succeeding in the connection test probes, and the perceived network costs. A direct route from the client to the server is preferred, but if that can't succeed, like it times out or the connection probes fail, we can bounce the audio through a relay server in the cloud that's reachable by both the client and cloud services. We don't ever set up WebRTC audio paths directly between two WebRTC clients. Like if user A calls user B, we don't connect the two clients. It's always client to server with media service in the cloud bridging the gap. Or if relay is required, it's client to relay to media service, and then however it is determined to get to the other client. It always traverses a Genesys Cloud media service, and that's so any server-side treatment can be applied, like call recording, transcoding, transcription, whatever.
Cool. Next question. When will we have access to GCV trunk settings like OLI, diversion, and other customizations?
To answer this, first, we should understand the differences between GCV and BYOC Cloud. BYOC Cloud is a solution that's meant to be as flexible as possible, so customers can set up connections from their GC org to third-party carriers of any variety, SBCs, whether that's premises or cloud-hosted, PBX, whatever variety of device, manufacturer, provider, whatever. And as a result, we provide many more buttons and knobs to configure the trunk as is needed by those third-party devices or services. Genesys Cloud Voice, or GCV, that's a service where Genesys, where we are your carrier. And as a result, the communication and compatibility between Genesys Cloud and the PSTN is Genesys's responsibility. So this means fewer customer-facing buttons and knobs to set up those trunks. This doesn't mean we will never expose more information or settings, but we would have to have an alignment of a use case, technical feasibility, and market interest to pursue those. So for items you're specifically interested in, be sure to open up an AHA Ideas portal entry and provide as much information on the use cases as possible, and our GCV team will review it.
Awesome. I think this is our last question. Could we get the IP or MAC addresses for the user's PCs so we can use it with E911 services?
Actually, the trend of late has been to go in the other direction and suppress user IPs and MAC addresses for privacy purposes. With that said, we have released a few things in the past months, and we have a few more things coming to improve physical location information for emergency services calls. For one, GCV now has the ability for users to provide their exact location. At the user level, they go enter where they are, and that is shared with emergency services if emergency services calls are placed through a GCV trunk. BYOC Cloud allows for integration with various E911 or the equivalent for your region providers, and that sends the user's DID if they have one, which can be a lookup key to find their location, or you can optionally send an extension if you don't have DIDs for every user. Just assign an extension and use that as the emergency services location lookup key. Also in beta now, we have the held protocol is supported for hardware phones, and that's a protocol where your hardware phone reports to the location information server where it is. Even if you unplug the thing and move it somewhere else and plug it in. If you have an LIS server and have configured that, we will support it in beta now, GA very soon. So
Awesome.
Not exactly what they're looking for, but I believe that solves the need, and that's the direction we're going.
Cool. And it sounds like a lot of exciting stuff is on the horizon. So again, if you want to be, on the front waves of helping us test these releases as they're getting ready, please join our beta headquarters program. That's the best way to find out when Alan and his team and several others are releasing features that are going to be available for testing, just so that you can get your hands on them a little early and provide us some valuable feedback. Speaking of feedback, Alan, David, great to have you on the show again. Thank you so much for stopping by to share all of your wisdom. I know this is a topic that interests people clearly because we don't always get this many questions that came in. I think we had, over 20 that came in, and you all were very kind to take the hour today to answer them for us. So thank you 1,000 times. What a great way to start the new year for the Genesys Q&A show. And hope we get to do it again soon, guys.
Yeah. Sure. Anytime. Thanks for having us, Matt.
Awesome. Thank you all. Happy New Year and talk to you soon. All right. That concludes our first episode of the year. Hope you all enjoyed. Like I said, if you have any follow-up questions based on what we heard today, Alan in our sign-off said he'd be happy to help come back and do a demo if we need it. So don't be afraid to ask. We can make sure that that happens. Drop it on our online forum or on this YouTube video. We'll be monitoring both to make sure your questions can get answered in timely and informative fashion. All right. Happy New Year, everybody. Good to see you again. Let's talk soon.
Thanks for tuning in for this week's episode. We hope it was helpful and maybe a little bit entertaining. Each week, our host and experts review community discussions and debate what content to discuss, so your voice matters. Did we miss something? Do you have a question for the show? Let us know. Join the conversation at the Genesys online community. As a Genesys customer or partner, you can create an account. Just click the sign-in button found on most pages and follow the necessary instructions to create an account. Also, feel free to email us at qashow@genesys.com. We'd love to hear from you. If this is your first episode, welcome. You can view our entire archives. Go to the Helpful Links panel found on most community pages and find the QA Show archive that interests you.
Also, check out the community's prize wall for current contests and previous winners.
We appreciate your support of the show and the community. Cheers!